On August 14, 1847, a clerk in South Carolina's Beaufort district filed a routine plantation entry that officials would spend decades trying to erase. It referenced a woman, recorded only as Sarah, standing 7 feet 2 inches tall, purchased for $3,000, and said to have killed 4 plantation overseers in a single night, with the very chains meant to restrain her. Within weeks, the Charleston Medical Journal mention of her autopsy vanished from surviving issues. 3 witnesses who testified at the inquiry disappeared within 18 months. Families connected to the case refused to speak of it for generations. Today, recently surfaced letters, ledgers, and bills of sale sketch the outline of what happened at Riverton Hall and force us to confront disturbing questions about endurance, calculated revenge, and the vast machinery built to protect terrible secrets. Riverton Hall lay 7 miles inland from the barrier coast, a spread of 800 acres bordered by the slow tributaries of the Combe River to the east and maritime forest to the west. The main house, a 2-story structure with Doric columns, sat above meticulously ordered workyards, cotton house, mill, forge, overseer's quarters, and, furthest from view, 2 rows of cabins where 127 enslaved people slept. Its owner, Marcus Grayson, inherited the property in 1843 with instructions to modernize, maximize, and prove that discipline could be graphed, optimized, and repeated. He obliged. Grayson's ledgers, restricted today, measure everything: hours worked, rations issued, punishments administered, the dimensions of sleeping quarters, even the frequency of preventative discipline. Grayson's head overseer was Tobias Finch, a Virginian who prided himself on never losing a person to escape. Under him worked 3 younger men, Nathaniel Huxley, Samuel Crenshaw, and Robert Vernon, trained to combine surveillance with performative displays of force. The machine ran smoothly for 4 years. Then a letter arrived. From Charleston, factor Edmund Lattimore came a proposal tailored to Grayson's ambitions. A woman of remarkable proportions and strength, sold quietly from a Virginia estate. Price, $3,000 over AAA prime field hand. Finch warned of risk. Anomalies breed unpredictability. Grayson saw a proof of concept. On July 23, 1847, he inspected the woman himself. The documentation called her skeletal structure exceptionally dense. Estimated weight, 240 to 260 pounds. Her shoulders outspanned most men's. Her hands could palm a skull. But what fixed Grayson's pen over the bill of sale was not her body. It was her eyes, watchful, calculating, retaining every detail. The receipt, dated July 24th, listed her only as Sarah, approx. 28 to 32, Virginia-born, sold as is. No surname, no history. She arrived at Riverton Hall on August 3rd, shackled in custom-forged chains, 4-inch cuffs, links as thick as a thumb, about 40 pounds of iron. Grayson staged her confinement near the quarters, a deliberate spectacle. Proper management, he wrote, requires visibility. Finch objected. Grayson overruled him. For 3 days, Sarah was fed twice daily and subjected to observational assessments. Overseers logged her posture, compliance, and strength. Grayson appeared each morning with Dr. Samuel Pritchard, a physician who treated plantation injuries and maintained an interest in physiological extremes. Pritchard took measurements, skull, limbs, grip force, recording a steady pulse and unlabored breathing under stress. He noted an unsettling constant: Sarah's silence. No English, no French, no cries under pain. Only eyes that lingered on hinges, bolts, and chain mounts, as if learning a language made of metal. On August 7th, Grayson ordered Sarah integrated into the Western Field Crews under Huxley. There, an incident would set the night in motion. 3 witnesses later testified that Huxley commanded Sarah to kneel for chain adjustment. She complied. He struck her once, then harder, establishing understanding from the start. She did not flinch. She only watched him. Unnerved, Huxley sent her to work. For the rest of the day, Sarah picked at triple rate, silent, mechanical, the rhythm of iron in the rows. That evening, Finch summoned his men. His log calls it a comprehensive orientation. Implements were prepared: whips, straps, clubs, and thumbscrews that shouldn't have been there. 2 enslaved men, Jupiter and Abraham, were placed outside as guards, out of sight of the window but close enough to hear. What happened next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. At first, only the sounds of procedure, commands, the scrape of iron, the crack of leather. No screams, no pleas, only the steady metronome of strikes meeting flesh, and silence where a voice should be. After 40 minutes, the rhythm changed. Chains began to move. Different, faster, Abraham said. Finch shouted, "Hold her down!" Metal screamed, like an anchor chain tearing loose. Then, heavy impacts, men shouting not in anger but in fear, furniture splintering, and beneath it all, a low, sustained sound, the first Sarah had made at Riverton Hall. Then, silence. When the door opened, Sarah stepped into the yard, still wearing her ankle cuffs, 6 feet of broken chain looped in her hands, the end links dark in the moonlight. She walked past Jupiter and Abraham without a word. Inside, the flooring had been torn from the joists. A table lay in shards. On the floor lay Finch, Huxley, Crenshaw, and Vernon, motionless. Pritchard would later write that their injuries showed methodical blunt force trauma consistent with heavy chain strikes, targeted, efficient, not frenzied. Sarah did not flee. Witnesses watched from cabin windows as she crossed the yard, measured, unhurried, toward the blacksmith shop. 3 strikes broke the lock. Sparks rose in the dark. When she emerged, her restraints were gone. In her hands, a hammer, chisel, pry bar. She went next to a windowless punishment house and dismantled the lock in minutes. 3 prisoners, 2 men and 1 woman, stepped into the night. Sarah pointed toward the western woods. They ran. She did not follow. Instead, she turned toward the main house and took her place at the base of the steps. Under the lamps, her silhouette stood plainly visible. She waited for 2 hours, while riders galloped for a magistrate and for Dr. Pritchard. Behind her, the enslaved community gathered in a quiet semicircle. No uprising, no torchlight, only witnesses. At dawn, armed men fitted her with heavier iron and escorted her to a wagon. She looked back once, an expression several later described as acknowledgement rather than triumph. Between August 12th and 18th, a hastily convened inquiry questioned Riverton Hall and, by extension, its neighbors. Officially, the overseer's deaths were tragic casualties of a dangerous profession. Unofficially, private letters and Pritchard's journal told a more complicated story. Coordinated discipline preceding a defensive explosion of violence. South Carolina law prescribed mandatory execution for enslaved people who killed white men. But Sarah's case frightened the system that created it. Witness accounts were incomplete. Evidence hinted at illegal devices and sustained assault, and the economic loss of a $3,000 asset worried planters. Beyond that, something even more unsettling had happened. No one ran in the chaotic week after the killings. Work continued, but without the ingratiating performances overseers expected. It was order without obedience, an omen. The verdict, a compromise. Sarah would be designated state property, held in secure custody, and leased to government projects, quarries, rice mills, a railroad crew, under escalating restraints. Grayson forfeited his investment. A fund compensated the overseers' families, and the most damning details were sealed for security. On August 13th, Sarah was brought to court. She stood silent. Pritchard called her mentally sound, selectively mute. In private, he wrote, "She understands everything. Silence is a decision." From 1847 to 1851, Sarah moved through several state projects. Records, fragmentary, often contradictory, agree on a pattern. She worked at extraordinary output, spoke only when safety demanded, and studied her environment with unnerving patience. At a quarry, bolts on her chain mount loosened over weeks. At a rice works, she mapped the building's routines and later directed a fire response as if she had gamed it out in advance. At a railroad site, she watched bridge work with an engineer's focus. Then came the night of March 17th, 1851, at a state mine near Newberry. A guard found Sarah outside at 2 a.m., cuffs on, chains removed, a sledgehammer in hand, striking the entrance beam. "It's cracked," she said in calm, educated English. "It will fail in the morning." Inspection confirmed it. She had likely saved lives. The incident made something undeniable. Sarah was not a mute anomaly. She was highly intelligent, precise, and capable of long-term planning. Officials, anxious to be rid of the problem, accepted a proposal from Dr. Franklin Liel, Hayes of Augusta, a physician obsessed with physiological extremes, to transfer Sarah for comprehensive study under heavy security. Hayes converted a warehouse into a laboratory, reinforced cells, examination rooms, journals that would later stain his name. For nearly 3 years he measured, provoked, isolated. Sarah complied with procedures, resisted psychological games, and observed. When Hayes introduced a door with sequential puzzles, she solved it in half the expected time, then reopened each mechanism to understand how to build one. By 1854, she spoke more, asking Hayes about anatomy, about how bodies fail, about efficient incapacitation. Hayes later conceded, too late, that she was conducting her own study with him as subject. In August 1854, Hayes staged a demonstration for 5 physicians, including Pritchard. When he attempted to show Sarah's pain tolerance, objections ended the session early. The next morning, Sarah was gone. She disabled her cuffs without breaking them, passed through multiple locks, and left a note. "Doctor, thank you for the education, though not the one you intended. You taught me how the body fails, how men think when they believe they are safe, and patience by testing mine. I am going north. If you pursue me, I will use what you taught me. If you let me go, you will never hear from me again." Sarah Hayes delayed reporting the escape. Self-preservation and fear prevailed. Notices went out 2 days later. None led anywhere. A 7-foot woman simply vanished. 2 years passed. In 1856, a free black farming community in Chester County, Pennsylvania, reported a tall figure moving silently at the edges of fields. Tools appeared where they were needed. Fires were discovered early and put out. A blacksmith named Isaiah Freeman began leaving notes. Curiosity, not accusation. A reply arrived in charcoal on birch bark. "I mean no harm. I am learning how free people live. I will remain at a distance until I know I will not bring danger to you." One November evening, the figure stepped into Freeman's lamplight. She ducked the doorway beam by habit. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "I'm the person from the Georgia notices. I was held illegally at the time of my departure. I killed no one during the escape. I've lived in the woods for 2 years. I needed to be sure your community was different." Sarah slept in a shed at the forest's edge. She rose before dawn to move stone, repair beams, turn earth. Rachel Freeman brought meals and, without demands, brought conversation. Slowly, fragments surfaced, sold from her mother at 11. Years of being valued for strength and punished for existing. Of Riverton Hall, she said only, "They were doing things that would have killed me eventually. If death was coming either way, I chose the version where I survived." Rachel taught Sarah to read in earnest. Children, unburdened by adult caution, asked direct questions. Sarah answered simply. She relaxed most in their presence, when lifting a beam became a lesson instead of a performance. By spring 1857, Sarah was part of the daytime rhythm, quiet, able, learning trades across the valley. Isaiah wrote in his journal, "She is educating herself in how to be free, building the life she was denied." Rumors reached Chester County, a man from South Carolina asking about an unusually tall woman. Walter Pembroke, a slave hunter, underestimated the community. Lawyers in Philadelphia warned the case would reopen Riverton Hall and Hayes's laboratory, doors many wanted closed. When Pembroke sought papers proving ownership, he found only complications. The community met him with coordination and silence. Somewhere in the correspondence trail, Hayes advised against pursuit. The subject has remarkable capacity for resistance. The cost of recapture would exceed any value derived. Some battles are better left, unfought Pembroke left. For Sarah, it was the first time a community had not only tolerated her presence, but defended it. In the years before the Civil War, Sarah bought 5 acres beside the Freemans and built a cabin of her own. She worked her land and hired out for heavy tasks, turning a reputation for strength into choice. Rachel recorded a first. Sarah laughed today. It sounded careful at first, but it was real. When war came, Sarah dug earthworks for militia defenses, moved military stores, and donated food. She refused to appear at rallies or trade her story for headlines. "I am not a story for others to tell," she told a journalist. "I'm a person trying to live a life." After the war, some urged her to pursue claims, a reckoning, compensation, the record set straight. She declined. "Going back would give it more power over my present than it deserves. I prefer to live forward." She mentored younger neighbors in carpentry, blacksmithing, and mechanics. In 1867, a traumatized escapee named Clara arrived, tall enough to attract the same cruelties Sarah had known. Sarah taught her what she'd learned the hardest way. Freedom is not only the absence of chains, it is the presence of choice. In time, Clara built her own farm and said Sarah had saved her life, not by rescue, but by example. In her 50s, Sarah had become an elder, sought for counsel, stubbornly private about the worst years. When Rachel once asked if she regretted the violence at Riverton Hall, Sarah answered carefully, "I don't regret what I did. Those men made their choices and I made mine. What haunts me is how much of my life was spent only surviving. I learned to read at 30, to build at 32. How much of me was lost to endurance alone. But who I am now was forged in those years. I carry both the loss and what I built from it." Sarah died in January 1889, around 65 years old. More than 200 people attended her funeral. Children she had taught now grown, neighbors who had worked beside her, men and women who had once been enslaved and saw in her life a map toward wholeness. Her headstone is plain. Sarah, 1820-1889. She survived to live. No height recorded, no mention of Riverton Hall. Back in South Carolina, Riverton Hall dissolved into parcels. Its buildings were reclaimed by swamp and vine. No marker notes the holding room. Dr. Hayes's papers, published posthumously, triggered a temporary medical controversy, then faded. The 4 overseers' names weathered on separate stones, their epitaphs silent about how they died. What remains is the tension these records will always hold. A system that measured a human being to the inch, and a woman who learned to measure the system back, its locks, its habits, and its fragile belief in its own permanence. Was everything revealed? Probably not. Plantation ledgers, destroyed journals, and missing witnesses leave deliberate gaps, proof that the archive can be edited by fear. But the outline that survives challenges convenient myths about compliance, control, and capacity. From chains and ledgers to a quiet Pennsylvania farm, Sarah chose, again and again, to transform survival into life. That, more than height or iron, is the part the record couldn't erase.